Look, while I have a little bit of an agenda done, I want to cover some things that I don't normally cover, underlay, and some things we'll get to a little bit later, hopefully, if we have time. But we had an update come out last month. I'm very, very excited about it. The update program with Floriani software for me has always been one of the highlights of the program. This was a fairly intensive update. You've got some neat new features, and I'd like to start off by taking you through the new features, some of the enhancement features, a little gift from DJ to all you Floriani software owners, and tell you about a couple of the fixes. First of all, the fixes. The text tool will now hold settings as your changes are made. The number 3 in the font branding is fixed. Those are the two fixes that were done. The new features, and I'm going to talk about them first, and then we'll go ahead and I'll show you how they work, and then we'll go through them one at a time. Save to Sew stabilizer notes, really a great update. It integrates the stabilizer notes as opposed to just at the end of Save to Sew, which it still does. It puts it up in here in the notes area, right here on the page. I'll demonstrate that in a minute. It also implants it on your printable version, and we'll talk about that too. We've got a new auto split satin stitch feature that I'm very excited about. When you exceed a length of your choice, we'll discuss that a little bit, but a length of your choice with a satin stitch, the software will automatically split the stitches into a random effect. There's a new compensation properties box and control. Look, probably of all the things that this update holds, the software has always been based on my measurement theory of embroidery creation. Most of you have heard me talk about this at some length in webinars in the past. If not tonight, certainly I'm going to cover a little bit about it. The new compensation properties box and control is something DJ and I worked on an amazingly long time. For me, folks, it truly was the missing link in the software. It gives you absolute control of your distortion values like never before. I'll go ahead and show you how it works. The ability to fade objects is a brand new feature. There's some new keyboard shortcuts. We won't spend a lot of time. In fact, I'll explain them to you, but I probably won't spend a lot of time on it. And we've now opened up the PES9 support, so the software now supports PES9. Enhancement features, you've got a new artwork tool or an enhancement to the artwork tool. You've got absolute control over the random split for satin stitches. You have simplified emboss line editing when you've done your own embossing, and you now have a new slow redraw icon. And then I'll just tell you DJ's gifts, and I'll show you some of them. You've got 32 new custom motif patterns, 8 new applique designs, and 2 new symbols within the software. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to go ahead and get started with the Save to Sew, and I'll just go ahead and open up a design. Let me open up my little tiger design here. So we've got a design on here, and certainly File, Save to Sew. It doesn't matter what I pick, we'll just keep it right there on Batiste. Next, Apply, and Yes. Next, as always, told you the stabilizer to use, but now when I hit Finish, watch. Boom. Right over here in the right-hand side now, you've got your stabilizer notes. I just think that is such a cool addition right there on the screen. Now, secondarily, what you can do is go under the print setting or the print preview in the software, and when you bring it up now, very important, at this point in time, you can just click on Settings, okay, and you need to make sure that you have the footer selected. Once that footer is selected, and you click OK at that point in time, as you zoom into the bottom now, those same notes up here in the design property box is now down here on the bottom of your printable page. I really think that is a wonderful, wonderful addition to the software. So I'm very, very pleased with that. So again, you have it both up here in the properties box. You also have it in your print preview feature, and certainly when you print that out, that'll accompany with it. Okay, let's go ahead and move on. We'll close that down. The auto split satin stitch. I'm going to go ahead and bring up my grid. As you all know, I have my grid set to 1.4 millimeters. Most of you should know the reason for that. If you don't, it's because 1.4 millimeters is the minimum satin stitch width you should ever use in embroidery. This is actually a little tip. I set the grid to 1.4 millimeters because when a satin stitch gets narrower than 1.4 millimeters, you have issues on your machine. That actually can cause bird nesting. That's why you eat garments in the execution of a satin stitch made too narrow. The ability to have that grid set to 1.4 millimeters is actually in the digitizing process. When I'm digitizing, when I have that grid set to 1.4 millimeters, what I have behind me is a very articulate, I have the density. I was playing around here, DJ and I were playing with working with multicolored yarns, and I was showing them a little trick that I do. So I had the density set to 1.5, about a third of the density of normal density. But the object of having, again, the grid set to 1.4 millimeters is no matter how much I zoom in or out of a design, as long as I'm digitizing, I now have a very exacting frame of reference to the minimum width of a satin stitch. When you make satin stitches narrower than 1.4 millimeters, you're asking for trouble when you're digitizing, okay? You're basically creating an effect that will not harm the machine, but it's going to eat garments, it's going to bird nest. That's one of the major issues, and it is the major issue why you do eat garments. Now, split satin stitches. Look, to make it much easier as you digitize those wide satin stitches, we've added the auto split satin stitch feature. This way, when you reach a specified satin stitch width, the default is 7 millimeters, and that can be changed. A split will automatically be applied to the satin stitch. So I'm going to come in here and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We'll go about 8. And I'll just continue with this satin stitch. And automatically, when I go ahead and mark the needle penetrations, and we'll get rid of the grid now, you'll see the needle penetrations. What this places, okay, is it actually does a random drop of the satin stitch. If I go down to the actual size and make it look 3D, it creates a fairly smooth effect still, but it allows you to throw a very, very long satin stitch, again, without harming or without being a detriment to your fabric. The maximum width for a satin stitch, and it's why it's actually set at that 7 millimeters, the maximum width of a satin stitch that I like to throw on a knit product is a maximum of about 8 millimeters. Once you get much wider than that on a knit product, the satin stitch, because of the natural pull of the stitches, pulls in, and that's where you get like this great big looping. You can rub your finger down along the satin stitch, and it just looks like a big bunch of loops happening on there. Now, work on a heavier base material or a more solid material, a buckram line twill cap, twill canvas and such, very heavy fabrics. You can throw satin stitches to a maximum of about 10, 12 millimeters. You can throw them pretty wide and they'll hold and you won't get that effect. But on knit, keep it till about 7 to 8 millimeters maximum. This defaults at 8. Now, the controls for it is under Tools and General Options. And you'll see right here, and I believe it is in, it's in Machine. It'll ask you right here, split up jumps, or split new satin stitches longer than, and there's the default of 7 millimeters. Folks, you can change it to what you want, okay? But again, I would recommend when you're working on knit products that you keep it to that 7, 8 maximum. Now, another feature, once you select the color and you come up in the Properties box to the Column tab, if you click on that, you'll see now that you also have a split satin stitch and the selection is random. Once selected though, I can say, look, I don't want to split it. I want to split it in a percentage. I want an absolute length of a split, or as you see, it defaults random. Well, look, if I come in and say, let's do it a percent, and that'll default to 50, and click apply, all the stitches, as you can see now, drop along that line. Where would we ever use something like that? Look, I've created some really neat effects doing elongated satin stitch. Let's say for lips, when I start fairly narrow and then go fairly wide back into narrow, and I'll split it at a 50% range, and it'll actually form the center of the lip. It can be used also very, very successfully in leaves and some wildlife. So you're achieving it basically with one satin stitch, but this line that's dropped can actually create a very, very dimensional effect in your embroidery. So it's more than just the value of having, and again we go into column, and I can just say do a random effect, apply it, and it'll drop it randomly. That gives you a more smooth effect. I will go into percentage and many times cut it at 50%. You know, folks, one of the things that you can do when something like this comes out is create a series of satin stitches, okay, wide satin stitches. Select them, go into column, and apply the different effects. Apply some different numbers, and look at what you get. I have always conformed as I taught the process, and as a digitizing house many years ago, for the 30 years that I was a digitizing house, I used to always give my digitizers, the people who worked for me, an hour to play every week. Now that didn't mean go outside and throw a baseball or play any game. It meant play with your embroidery. And this was the kind of stuff that I was talking about. I'd say, knock my socks off. Do something that just blows me away with an effect. Why I was showing DJ earlier, we were talking about variegated yarns. And I said, when I do variegated yarns, because of the way that it's spooled, if you do a satin stitch with a variegated yarn, and you just throw one satin, what you'll have is linear lines. Let's say that it's red, white, and blue. You're going to have an area of red, an area of white, an area of blue within that satin stitch. So what I do when I do things like that, I'll grab that satin stitch. I'll actually change. Now, I used a 0.5 density. For me, for small lettering, that's the proper density for small lettering. But I would change that to 1.5. Okay, and I would apply it. All right, but then, and I'll go ahead and change colors, I went from top to bottom on that. Now grabbing the satin stitch again, I'm going to go from bottom to top with another 1.5, and I'll grab another color, and I'll go from top to bottom with another 1.5. Okay, when you run that, now they look like they're right on top of each other. That's not the way thread lies. Thread falls off of each other to fill the area. But you would have an amazing blend of a variegated yarn with that. And we were talking about this earlier. That's why I'm bringing it up. Tip and trip? Absolutely. Those are the kind of things that you play with. That came out of playtime from one of my digitizers. So make a little time. My father always conformed to that too. He always said to me, make a little time to take a little time to play. And that was that example too, just in like fill stitching. We'll get to fill stitching. You have a whole variety of fills. How many of you have made 2 or 3 inch boxes and stitched out every fill effect? Every one of those effects, every one of the embossing effects can be utilized for something within the software. It really is a wonderful way to elevate your learning curve. Okay, we're going to talk about the new compensation properties box and the control of such. I'm going to go ahead and make a fill stitch. Let me grab another color here. Okay, let me turn off this. And you know what? On the top of this fill, I'm going to put a running stitch. We'll just come right along that line. And on the bottom, I'm just going to do a very quick satin stitch. But I'm going to apply no overlap to it. I'm just going to do a satin stitch just like this. Okay, now, the way that my theory works is that when you put a fill next to a running stitch, because of the natural pull of the fill stitch needs to exceed, needs to go outside of the line of that running stitch 5/10 of a millimeter. 5/10 of a millimeter. So what we would normally do, we would select this. You can come into your pull compensation. Nice thing about pull compensation is that we have our absolute values. Pull compensation that was based on percentages never made sense to me. We left it in there. The software originally started like that because the percentage has to be based on the initial width of the fill that you're doing. So we developed the absolutes. Why? Because I could say absolutely, because I know it's next to a running stitch, I want you to overlap 5/10 of a millimeter. Click apply, and that would happen. And that's actually the way that it should look. The fill needs to exceed the length or the outside. Go to the outside in the direction of the stitch. Go to the outside of the running stitch, okay? But now, example, down here at the bottom, I have a fill next to a satin stitch. Well, the way that the software worked in pull compensation was that you had one side, the other side, or both sides. But in reality, it controlled both sides most of the time. You could affect the one side, but when you went to do the other side, it would affect a change. So when I put a fill next to a satin, the amount of overlap that needs to take place is 1 millimeter or more. So the point is this: I have two elements. I have a fill next to a running on one side of the object. I have a fill next to a satin on the other side of the object. Well, what the new control gave you is this. You can select that, you can come into pull compensation, and you can say, I now want control of the first and second side simultaneously. Now, if your fill is going up and down, the first side is the top. The second side is the bottom, okay? So on the first side here, I'm going to go ahead and put in my 0.5. On the second side, and I'll exaggerate a little bit, we'll go ahead and put in 2 so that you can see it, and you click apply. And boom, now if we come up here and look, you'll see that I'm that 5/10 of a millimeter that I want on the top. But as I come down here to the bottom now, you'll see that I'm now, and I'll turn it off to 3D, you'll see that I'm now that 2 millimeters of an overlap. You can grab it and measure it, and you'll see that it's right on with it. There's your 2 millimeters right there, okay? That's an amazing level of control within the software. As I said, for me, it's that missing link, because I always look at an embroidery design and say, what stitch type is this, and what stitch type is it sitting next to? I have a fill on one side, I have a satin on the other side. So what I'm going to do is now I have complete control of my first and second side. If the fill stitch is going left to right, okay, if you're going left to right, it is on the first side is the left, the second side is right, okay? And you know what? I'll go ahead and demo that because, and in fact, I actually want to go in and make a change to that. I think it should say first and second. Up here it should say left top or so, and here right bottom. So we'll figure that out. You know what? Wording things, folks, is harder than you think sometimes. So I'm going to go ahead and change the direction of the fill now to left and right. We'll let that change. And my first side is now to the left. My second side is to the right. So if it's going straight up and down, it's top, and first side is top, second side is bottom. Get myself confused. If I'm going left to right, the first side is left, the second side is right. Okay, you have the same kind of control though now with your push compensation. You know what? We'll go ahead and just change this angle again. Or no, we'll leave that angle just like that. But let's go ahead and just zero these out. And I just want to show you a little bit about push, okay? Let's go ahead and grab our push control and apply first and second right now. We're looking first and second, and once again, I have up on the top, I have that running stitch outline. It's right there. Well, that fill butts up, or just about butts up to that running stitch. The fill stitch up here at the top is actually going to grow in height 3 to 5/10 of a millimeter. Okay, 3 to 5/10 of a millimeter. Weight of thread builds up on each other. That's what causes the effect of push. But I now have the control now down here at the bottom. So the point is, excuse me, let me finish the point. The point is here, in order to continue to have that running stitch line, or have that running stitch line meet right on the edge of that fill stitch, the fill stitch needs to drop down about 5/10 of a millimeter. The weight of the thread building up on itself will force it right to the edge of that running stitch. And folks, you can take this to the bank. Down here at the bottom, where the fill is meeting the satin stitch, And again, it meets right on the line. No overlap is necessary. Once again, push will actually push it considerably. I see a lot of digitizers who will drive that fill underneath the satin stitch. Those are wasted stitches. Pull will take care of that. So what I'm going to do, let's go ahead and view it to fit the window. I'm going to select it. I'm going to go into pull compensation. I'm going to go first and second side. Now, in pull, the first side is, if my fill were going up and down, first side would be left. Okay? If I'm going left to right, the second side is, the first side is bottom. The second side is your right and your top. So, up at the top here, I want 5/10 of a millimeter. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to change my second side to 5. I'm going left to right, so it is on the top. Down here at the bottom, I'm actually going to leave at 0, and this would be the effect that I hope to get. You know what? I may not have done that correctly. Nope, there it is. If I go ahead and turn it off the 3D, you'll now see that I've created 5/10 of a millimeter. Okay, and I'm right on it about right there. Nope, didn't quite take. What did I do? Hold on one second, folks. Maybe I had that wrong. Let's see if that makes a difference. Nope, I apologize. The first side is the top. The second side is the bottom. Look, I apologize for that. Even though I know it, it still confuses me. This fill is now going to push right up to that running stitch line, okay? And you can take that to the bank. The pull and push, look, I really am. I'm excited about this option more than anything else. I always wanted to apply different pull and push compensations to each side end of a satin stitch or a fill stitch, and the programmers quite honestly finally figured out how to do it. That gives you the ability to now fully customize your compensation by side and end. Look, let me explain though at this point. Once you start working in here with the first and second levels and such, realize you're doing your own compensations. In that case, when you go through Save to Sew, because Save to Sew adds additional compensations, but my opinion is once you get to an advanced level of digitizing, your compensation should be done on the screen as you digitize or shortly after. Why? Because that gives you absolute control. Absolute control of it. You know what? I actually think I was correct on the first one. I will review that and I will get back to you on that while we're doing questions, and then I'll have DJ run a little check on that. The next thing I want to show you is fading objects. We'll go ahead and bring up another design. I'll bring up the tiger design. Now, one of the neat things that we always had is this little eyeball, and I'm over here in the sequence view now, where I could actually turn off colors, okay? So I can come in here and I can close down colors like this, and this can be very beneficial when you're editing. It can be very beneficial in the digitizing process to hide a color when you're digitizing on top. Well, one of the things that I always felt, and we felt, is that many times when I'm editing or when I'm working with other colors, the thing that really bothered me was the color. I still many times want to see what's there, and you know what, I'll actually come in here and we'll do away with a couple of these other things. I'm looking specifically for that grass green. I think that's it right there. Okay, now if I'm coming in and editing like this fill, I still want to see that. So you know what you can do now? Once you've hidden the colors that you want, let's say for editing, for some advanced editing in there, come over to the sequence view, right click, and you can say, excuse me, my apologies folks, fade hidden. I'm going to have to take a little drink. When I click on fade hidden, it goes white, okay? Yet I can see all the other colors in there. So it makes it extremely, extremely beneficial for editing. Excuse me. I think that is just an amazing feature. I use it all the time now when I'm doing my editing. Again, many times I want to see the entire structure there. I just want to get the color out of the way. All right? There are some new keyboard shortcuts. You can align left. Look, we've added to these keyboard shortcuts to make it easier for you to align multiple objects. Align left is the shift and the left arrow key. Align top is the shift and the top arrow key. Align bottom, shift and bottom arrow key. Align right, shift and right arrow key. align center, shift, and C. Look, while I'm just running through that, in the My Floriani Today page, go to What's New in Floriani, and you'll see everything that was included in the update, step by step, how to do it. And then finally, let me turn these colors back on. Now, once you've turned on that fade, you have to come back in, and if you don't want it to always show the fade hidden, I leave mine on now, but you can turn it off. That way when you turn off a color, it completely will evaporate the color. So some people like to edit in the one form. I really like this. And of course, now under File and Save As, when you go into your formatting, you'll see that there is now the PES version 9. There is also the multi-needle PES version 9. So it opened it up for the really, really large hoops on the multi-needle machines. That was quite the update too. Okay, some of the enhancements, or you know what, let's if there's any questions with what I've covered so far, Kath, let's go ahead and take a couple questions. My last 3 webinars, I haven't been able to take any questions at all, so I'd be happy to answer some questions, or let's see, folks, if you can stump me. I'm ready. A shape that is round? Oh, that's a great question, okay? First of all, I'm going to use the artwork tool, and we'll do an ellipse. And when you go to do an ellipse, if you want to make a perfect circle, you hold down the control button, okay? So we'll hold down the control button. Now, that generates as a piece of artwork. This is one of the things, if you don't know, I love about the software. Whenever you're using the artwork tool, you can select the artwork over here in the sequence view, and we can right-click and let's say convert to a complex fill, okay? And the complex fill is going up and down, all right? Now, let me explain. When you want to make a perfect circle in embroidery, you don't make a perfect circle. If you ever try to stitch a perfect circle with a fill stitch, you'll actually run an egg, okay? Because what happens is up here at the top, it's going to pull down. Here at the bottom, it's going to pull up. Here on both extreme sides, it's going to push out, and it's going to look like an egg. So you know what, folks? If you want to make a perfect circle in embroidery, you digitize an egg, all right? But with the Total Control software, you can actually come in here, you can go into your pull compensations, and you can say, now this is actually pretty easy. We can send on an absolute value, and we can say on both sides with our pull, the natural pull of a satin stitch, 5/10 of a millimeter. So I add that 5/10 of a millimeter, and you see it got taller at the top and bottom, 5/10 of a millimeter. In the push, I'm going to say both sides, the natural push of a satin stitch. In my book, I write 3 to 5/10 of a millimeter. With the weight of thread nowadays, even 40 weight thread, with our polyester, I found it's more 5/10 of a millimeter. So I'll put in 5/10 of a millimeter. And you'll see it apply it. You know what? I'm going to have to check just one thing. Excuse me. I did 0.5. And apply it. There we go. And you'll see what I've done. I've blunted the ends of here. And it's not as exaggerated, but if you looked in, I've actually shaped that more like an egg. As I zoom in, these are flatted now, and they've actually pulled in 5/10. This will pull up or pull in, and actually push out just right here, forming a perfectly round edge. Up here at the top where it exaggerates above it, okay? And I can actually come into shape. And you can see the lines that are digitized. There's the perfect circle. That was a great idea. Thank you, DJ. DJ just walked over and pointed that out. He is so valuable to have in the room with me. We'll fit the window. You know what, hon? When I sit in this room, and this is for everyone, I've said this for so long. Yes, it's Floriani software, but it's DJ Anderson's software. It's Kathy's Quinn's software. It's Darlene's software. It's Karen's software. It's anyone who has anything to do who works with the software. Folks, it's your software. So many of these improvements and so many of the updates have come from the users, okay? They've come from our educators. They come from DJ. That's why I said, you know what, I kind of like it when you stump the wally, so to speak. As much as I know about the software, It has amazed me since day one how many ways there's still to find shortcuts and things that other people just come up with. It's an amazing aspect to developing software and to working with the developers. For me, the first day I had the software in my hands, I went, oh my gosh, I wish I would have done this, I wish I would have done that. You know what? That's what led to the free updates, because I have always looked upon software as a work in progress. And at this point with Suite, I just think it's an amazing tool. It's an amazing tool, and it's more software in most cases than most people will ever use. To make a perfect circle in embroidery, you actually stitch an egg, okay, or more of an egg shape. You elongate it, and you can see when I went into shape, you can see the actual shape that I digitized. You'll see that I'm exaggerated on this side, exaggerated on the top, blunted on both sides, okay? Now, if I had a satin stitch going around that, I would have increased this. I was just doing a circle based on just a fill stitch sitting out there all by itself. Try it, folks. You'll be amazed. Stitch an egg, and you'll run a circle. Stitch a circle, you'll run an egg. Okay, another question, Kath? Oh, honey, I would love to explain a little bit about underlay. Let's talk about underlay with really the two structures that we utilize underlay under for the most part. We utilize underlay under satin stitches. We utilize underlay under fill stitches. We'll start with a satin stitch. I'll just go ahead and make a couple of keyboard letters here. Just one second, I gotta get something out of the way on my screen. Let me just get up here to some block lettering. Block lettering is easiest to show it with. Okay, and we're going to size this one at 5 millimeters in height, fairly small letter, okay? And I want it to be a letter I. Oops, not a 6, a letter I. I apologize, folks. Okay, when I'm doing it, actually, I'm going to go ahead and make this a little taller, just so it's got more stitching on the screen. Absolutely, and I'm going to cover a little bit about that. Look, folks, this is going to sound kind of crazy, but I was extremely well known for my lettering when I was a digitizer, and people ask me all the time what underlay or what was my secret. My secret was always underlay, okay? And the trick with small lettering is a heavy underlay with a very light top stitch, okay? You must realize that in most cases material really doesn't like stitching, okay? It's obtrusive to the material. It pushes it out of shape. So I've always found, and the way that I was taught was we do a softer side of stitching. In fact, with my underlay, when I'm done with small lettering, it looks like a letter already, okay? Because what I use, I will generate my keyboard lettering or in my digitizing, but I will select it, and the underlay that I love to use for small lettering is I'll use a center line covered by a zigzag, okay? I'll apply this. Now, you have some really neat controls. You see your zigzag on your zigzag inset is set to 0.2. When I do small lettering and I go into my underlay, I actually offset that to 0, okay? Let me explain why. This is called a loft and lock underlay. Underlay needs to be a fairly substantial length. So if you come in and you look at my stitch length on my underlay, the stitch length is set at 3 millimeters. Length equals loft. The longer the straight underlay, the greater the loft it gives to the top stitch. But many times when we execute small lettering with elongated underlay, you'll see the underlay pop out of the lettering. So people naturally start to throw very short underlay underneath their lettering. No. I first saw this utilized by some very, very well-known German digitizers. And I actually, for years, called it the German underlay because they were the first that I really saw utilize it. My father did a lot of straight underlays. He did some zigzags. When I first saw German digitizing, I saw that they physically drew in their underlay. The process of embroidery was one where we utilized something called cartooning, we used to cartoon our designs. We would take the image, enlarge it 6 times, and draw the stitches in place. I never physically drew my underlayer in place. My father never taught me really that. When I saw the Germans digitizing, they used to use a red pen and they would physically draw their underlay. That's how important underlay was to a master digitizer. And I understood and I was taught the art form of underlay. But the first time I ever saw this, and then I analyzed it and ended up changing the name to Loft and Lock. I use elongated running stitches for my straight underlay. 1, 2, even 3 times. Yields great loft to even a small lettering. But then what happens is it does a double zigzag. And I let the zigzag go almost to the extreme edge of the satin stitch. Now, why? It can never show. These are going at about a 45-degree angle. They're pulling into the center. But what this double zigzag does, number one, it puts 2 more underlays over that straight underlay. But the zigzag locks that straight underlay in place. When I do that, and normally most people find their density on their text, okay, they're going to run at about a 0.4 or a 0.5. My software defaults to 0.5. When I lay a heavy underlay that heavy, many times I can go to a 0.6 density. And that is so unobtrusive to a piece of knit. I swear to you, you will find just some of the finest, absolutely the finest lettering ever. Heavy underlay, lighter top stitch. Now, the change that I make, or the differential, will make a nice big letter. We'll do about a 1-inch tall letter. I've done this metrically. And I'll go into my underlay. First of all, let me go ahead and pull these off, and I should explain. A contour underlay, when we apply it, is an edge walk, okay? The contour walks along the edge. I do utilize edge walk underlays on wide lettering, okay? And the inset that I set is anywhere from about 4 or 5 to 7/10 of a millimeter. Why? Because of the natural pull of the satin stitch. What the edge walk underlay does is it keeps a nice rigid edge along the satin stitch, a nice clean edge along that satin stitch. I always use center line for my travel, okay? Perpendicular, or I should show you, we'll go ahead and shut off contour and then I'll show you what I use. Parallel is basically 1 through the center, maybe 2 depending upon the way, and then it does just 1 zigzag. I don't use that one that often, okay? I do utilize it. Center line is just what it says. It just applies center line underlay. I do use those in every letter that I do. I use center line. I'll show you the differential. Perpendicular, just running the, again, the opposite direction of the top stitch, and then of course you have your zigzag that you apply. Now, when you go into some of them, okay, perpendicular actually is utilized for fill stitching. You can't use your lattice, okay, it doesn't function. You can't use your full lattice, and you can't use your edge travel, okay. The underlay that you utilize in satin stitching is contour, parallel, center line, and zigzag, okay? So what I use on big lettering, you'll see something like this. You're going to see center line, you're going to see edge walk. Many times you'll see a double zigzag depending upon the colors that I'm using and the colors that I'm stitching on. If I'm stitching like black on white, I'll use the zigzag. It adds, again, more loft, brings the stitches up and out of the base fabric. If I have compatible colors or tonal colors, I will use my contour. I'll use the center line. That'll give you a nice crisp letter. What am I talking big letters? Once you get to greater than a 1/2 inch inside. Small lettering for me is about 3/16 up to 1/4 inch, between 1/4 inch and a 1/2 inch. Once you get to 1/2 inch and larger, I consider those fairly large letters. Certainly once you're up to 1 inch tall letters and that, you're going to utilize edge walk all the time. Okay, let's talk fill stitching. Now, fill stitching. Let's go ahead and make a fill stitch. I'm going to change the color. Now, first of all, I'm going to change the direction of this fill. And I'm going to just go straight left to right. Okay, if I'm going left to right in a fill stitch, and I'll zoom into this, the underlay that I utilize is actually the default underlay click on it, go into underlay. It's perpendicular, okay? It's just going the opposite direction. Now the trick, and you'll see that our software defaults on it, and this is one of the issues a lot of people have with fill stitching, and especially with underlay. I tend to throw a fairly long underlay underneath my fill stitch. Why? Because again, length equals loft. The longer my underlay, the greater the loft it gives to the stitch on top, okay? The density is set at 3. That's the spacing differential between lines. That's pretty much what I've always done. If I have very, very soft fabrics, you can change that default. You can come in and set it at 2 and apply, and the lines will get tighter. That's the control that you have there. Run stitch length is just your movement length. Your inset allows for the natural pull of the satin stitch. That's why it pulls in set and tens. And then you certainly have your zigzag inset. Now, again, normal underlay, going left to right, is up and down. Even going at 45-degree angles, many times it's up and down. But now, let's change it. Let's take the fill, and let's run that fill now straight up and down, okay? We'll go back to 90 degrees. When I lay a fill stitch up and down, people normally will, again, just run a perpendicular underlay. That's fine, but I'm always going to include full lattice, and I'll hit apply, okay? Let me explain what this does. I'll actually turn off the perpendicular at this point in time. Why that you do a full lattice? Look, many times you'll run a fill straight up and down. You'll have a preset density of 0.4, which is the fill density. That's the normal density for a fill stitch. But the issue is that even when you're running like that, you'll sometimes see the material color coming through. The issue for most people, they think, is density, and they'll add more density and more density and more density till not only will you make it bulletproof, many times you'll have a ripple in the absolute fabric. Well, look, if you take a piece of knit, okay, a knit t-shirt, and you put it in your hands and you pull it apart left to right, you spread the fibers. That's why big guys like myself for many years, although I'm not as big as I used to be, knit stretches like that so it could stretch kind of around our belly. Pull a piece of knit from top to bottom, there's very little stretch. The way a garment is woven, the actual thread strands are woven, but the length of the threads pull apart as they're woven straight up and down, so when they pull apart, you're separating the fibers. When you run a fill stitch straight up and down, the stitching actually is falling into the stitching of the garment. When you use perpendicular, you do not give yourself enough loft in order to bring it up and out of the fabric. The trick to your fills when they're going normally straight up and down on knits has always and is always lattice work. Again, do it at about a stitch length of 4 millimeters. You're building like a fence. You're building a foundation stitch below there. As the stitches now sink into that or go into that, they stop. They're not going to go anywhere. And that's a little bit of a lesson on underlay. I hope you and everyone else found that helpful, Kathy. If Kathy's not there, I'm going to go ahead and move right on. And I'm okay, no problem, hon. Edge travel was actually developed. There's two things that you can utilize it for. I'll go ahead and just make one more fill here. Let's zoom in. Well, let's not zoom in. Let's change the color first. We'll go to like a yellow. Let me get rid of the underlay that's under there, the perpendicular. Click apply. And then we'll do, click on it one more time. I'm so sorry. And we'll do edge travel and click apply. Okay, what edge travel was actually utilized for was it developed when we had the Fawari system. Fawari machines did not like, I'm going to have to change my start and end point on here. Let me move my start point here in the center. Let me move my end point up here. And you'll see the edge walk, okay? The edge walk was actually built, and if I come into a slow redraw, you'll see exactly what it does, okay? Started here, but it walked along the edge, and now it's going to do the same thing as it comes to this point where it starts and then where it ends. We'll go ahead and go quickly. as it traverses over to the next start point, it walks along the edge, okay? Well, it was developed initially for the Fuwari system. But edge walk is wonderful. Look, if you're ever going to put satin stitching along this edge, and on certain fabrics, when you walk with an underlay, if you're just traveling, certain fabrics, leather style materials, they don't like a lot of stitching, and so I don't use any underlay in most cases underneath fill stitching. Those types of fabrics don't like it, all right? But many times you'll walk under that fill, and actually you can see that underlay. It gives a loft, and you can actually see it. Also, when I travel under fill stitches with another color to get from one area to another area per se, I always walk along the edge. The edge walk is placed in there to allow you to hide the movement through the fill stitch. As you saw where this one started, it went straight up and down. You wouldn't consider that an underlay because it's going the same direction as the fill. But anytime it's going the opposite direction, it's always going to generate it along the edge. It's a hiding technique. It's more so there to hide it. If those of you who have a Fuwari machine, Fuwari machines don't like fill stitches to be walked through the middle. So the edge walk was originally developed for that, but it was developed simultaneously as a hiding feature. Again, other colors, if you're running other colors under it, I walk along the edge. If I'm stitching with no underlay, I'll always select my edge walk because underlays tend to show because they loft. Yes. Because let me explain why, Kath, okay? Because when you're working on polar fleece, you have two issues. Number one, you want loft, but you also want to mat, okay? You want to mat down the pile. So anytime that we're trying to mat down the pile, so if I come in here even with this one, File, Save to Sew, come in here and select my polar fleece, right here, next Apply and Yes. Okay, I have always loved Save to Sew. I really do. You have both the perpendicular and you have the lattice work. Again, the reason that that's in there is because it's matting down the polar fleece and yielding maximum loft. So again, it just adds extra stitches in there so that you can, it's always based on the fabric, okay? It's always based on the fabric, always has been, always will be. Will we get smarter? Excuse me? Do I make a lot of adjustments to the program fonts? Yes, I do. Okay, I'll be very, very honest. I mean, the thing that you've all always gotten from me is honesty in this process. And I'll give you a very clean example, a very clear. Now look, we took over a piece of software. We've been developing new fonts, all right? But there were close to 100 fonts already digitized in the software, all right? In the process or over time, look, maybe we'll go in and redo all those fonts because there's certain aspects, and I'm going to just utilize block. And again, you know what? This is the part of webinars, and this is the part, and I don't want to sound hokey. I don't want a lot of things coming in going, boy, the guy is really nice because he tells us this stuff. This is reality, folks. When I'm teaching you a webinar, I want to teach you the embroidery process. Okay, and right here is a good example. I just made a letter L, keyboard lettering, with an aerial block stitch. And I'm going to zoom into this corner, okay? See how this corner is created? This is what I call in my classes the Kachunk Stitch. What a digitizer has done here is they've come digitizing from a straight element of stitching into a curve back into a straight element of stitching. You're forcing the same amount of stitching from here to here as you have from here to here. This right here causes bird nesting. Now, the fix-it for many digitizers is what you see, and that's why it defaults to that. It's short stitches, okay? Because of the short stitches, you don't get as much needle implants into there, hence, it's not going to necessarily bird nest. But I don't think you get as pretty a corner, and I think you're still stressing the fabric. Now, that's a nice fix-it, and that's what we've come up with, the fix fonts that don't curve around a corner correctly. You utilize your short stitches. Anytime, I call this a hard corner. My preferred method is to edit and change the angle. So, Normally I would select it and I'd come into reshape, but when you go to reshape a font, you can't, okay? But you can do this, and this was a really nice update we did early in the program. Select it, right click, and just say break up the text. The minute that you break up your text, you've basically taken it from font technology to stitch data. Why? Because now you can select it, you can come into shape, you now have angle lines. Folks, move that angle line there, move that angle line over there. I call this angle in and angle out at the same angle or relative same angle of the corner. Right click, left click, and you just what I call de-kachunked it. You'll never bird nest, and that is a lot easier on the fabric. It's a soft, it's a passive turn. So yes, I edit my fonts. Another thing that I'll do with fonts many times, and I'll go ahead and do a couple of other ones, and I can just use a couple of like letter L's. I could probably do a couple, just a second. An A, maybe even next to an I. Okay, oops, excuse me. Okay, one of the things that has always bothered me, and what I edit all the time, and this is with small lettering, and I'm going to go under General, excuse me, or under Commands, and I do not want a trim in between characters, so I'll tell it no, is the connection stitch between letters. This stitch finishes this letter, steps into this letter, and the thread sticks out like a sore thumb. That's because it's elongated, okay? How can I take care of that? Look, in my book I write that the rules to embroidery is that you never throw a running stitch less than, let's say, 1 millimeter. Why? Because you want it to show. But what about if I want to hide a running stitch? So with small lettering spaced between 0.8 of a millimeter apart, go into your stitch edit feature, find the stitch where it left the A and it stepped into the I. I select it, grab it, move it, make sure I have the right stitch. I right click and I say insert before that stitch. I put a stitch right along the edge of the letter I. Then I drop 2 to 3 tiny little stitches in between the letter A and I. The stitch length that I utilize here, those are dropped with a left mouse click, okay? So once I select it, I right click and say insert before, and then I'm left clicking. And you'll see that just generated stitches. But I'll normally step right to the edge. Then I will left click, left click, left click, left click, and left click along the edge again. The stitch length of those stitches is 2 to 3/10 of a millimeter. For every rule in embroidery, there's an exception to that rule. I drop those at minimal lengths because those will drive down into the fabric. You'll never have to trim that stitch out again. And it's as old as embroidery itself. It's how we hide a running stitch. It's how I hide running stitches under other running stitches. I throw running stitches at length of 2 and 3 millimeters. When I want to hide a running stitch, even of another color, I'll drop those stitch lengths at 2 to 3/10 of a millimeter. You won't even know they're there. It's a hiding technique for the running stitch. It also makes your embroidery, when you're doing keyboard lettering like this, a continuous filament of thread. Okay, do we have some way to go with font technology? Absolutely, but I'll tell you, font technology from when it originated, it's come an awful long way. It's come an awful long way. There was a time I would never have used an auto underlay. I use it constantly within the software now. I have something I'm working on in my head. I'm going to throw at the programmers probably over the next year. I don't know if they can do it, but it's a pathing technique for hiding stitches, and if I can pull it off, it'll, I think, once again revolutionize the software. And you know what, Kathy? I have, while I thought we were going to have a lot more time, I wanted to talk real quickly about the Artwork Enhancement tool. Now under your Artwork tool, while we always had a pen, rectangle, and an ellipse, you now have a triangle that you can utilize. And simply by holding down the Control key, you'll get a perfect 3-sided triangle. You also now have a diamond, okay? And the same thing. Just hold down the Control key. Again, those are generated artwork. Once they're artwork, you can right-click on it. You convert it to, oh my gosh, you can convert it to a complex fill. You can convert it to any of the stitch types that you want. Want to make it an apple stitch? Boom, it's an apple stitch. Drops the stitches and everything. Because it is again, vector-based digitizing, it sees that as a piece of vector art. So you can select it just like using the magic wand. You just right-click and you can convert it to any stitch type that you want. Steel stitch, I can make a beautiful border on it. So that was a really nice update. A couple of the other enhancements, if you want to take a look, you now have a slow redraw icon. So instead of hitting view and slow redraw, right here's your slow redraw icon. Certainly it's better when you have a design on there. So let's open one up. But you can come in here, just click on that. There's your slow redraw now. I think that's pretty cool. So that was a real nice update. I will tell you that because we are out of time, in the motif patterns, DJ has created 32 new motif patterns for you. Some of them say Happy Thanksgiving. One says Merry Christmas on it. He's done a series of Christmas stars. There is a whole series, 32. He's got Happy Holidays. Those are where you can like do a running stitch line and apply the motifs to that running stitch line. They're very cool. In the applique designs, and I'll just show you real quickly with the applique shapes, he's added baseball, basketball, cheer, soccer, football, dance, softball, volleyball. They're all in there. He digitized those for us. And now one of the really neat things that I like that he added into the software were on the symbols. And if you come into your symbols, he's now added, and I'll scroll down to it, a register mark and a trademark that you can just drop in. When you're working with registered designs or trademark designs, you can just click on it, size it to the size that you want. It'll run like an absolute dream. He did a great job with that. He also did that with the TM. Those are some presents from DJ to all of you. With that said, it's now 9 o'clock. I cannot believe an hour has gone by already, folks. I could go on all night with you. I love you all. I thank the staff. All of you moderators who help not only at these webinars, but on a daily basis with the forum and such. I love you, ladies. I know I owe you a little private webinar. We'll get to that the beginning of this New Year's. It's been a very, very busy year for me. Kathy, the entire, all you educators that are out there, Karen and her support staff, and to you, DJ Anderson, and to the fine people of R&K Distributing. I love you all, and to all of you out there who are my clients and our clients. We love you. Hugs and stitches. We'll see you next time, folks. Bye-bye.